Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so good morning once again, and welcome everyone on behalf of the Belize Bureau of Standards. Today I'll be presenting on the biodegradable product standards. I'll be giving an overview of what the standards are, why we need them, and some important things to know from each of them. So why is there the need for these standards? Well, as you may know it, that plastic pollution causes harms to humans, animals, and environment, and they're very toxic pollutants that last hundreds and even thousands of years in the ecosystem, the environment, and they cause much harm to humans as equally as the others. We have a bad habit of littering, and it goes out into the ecosystem, the environment, and it returns right back to us. And with this, it causes detrimental damages in every way. Now, as a country, we recognize that we have a major problem with respect to plastic, and we love to litter after using any single-use disposable products, and therefore the Belize standards for biodegradable products, we have the specification and labeling, was created for the phase out of single-use disposable plastic bags, the single-use disposable styrofoams, and plastic food containers and utensils. And then we have the Belize certification scheme, which forms the objective method for determining solely the bio-based content of raw materials, intermediates, additives, and finished products, and labeling to communicate this value to our end users. As a solution and as a means of a possible immediate and direct impact, the phase out of those products, as Mr. Cancino had mentioned, was approved by the Cabinet on March 20, 2018. And we have statistical evidence from the SIB National Survey and DOE Public Awareness 2016 that shows us that annually we import about 52 million pieces of food containers, both styrofoam and plastic, 200 million plastic bags, 37 million agriculture plastic bags, 57 million plastic bottles, and annually manufactured products such as 5 million, as you can see there, the styrofoams, 35 million single-use plastic bags, 432,000 styrofoam egg trays, and 500,000 plastic straws and utensils, which accounts for about approximately 100,000 metric tons of municipal waste for the final disposal. So you can see that these numbers are quite alarming, and these happen annually. And therefore, these standards are here for the awareness and indication of the proper use and waste management of all plastics, including biodegradable plastics, which should be supported and promoted. Now, the Belize Bureau of Standards, as the national standards body, has the responsibility to spearhead the development of relevant national standards. And as you can see here on the right side, we have a standardization development process, which consists of different stages that takes its own time from stage 0 to stage 90. And here, this process exists, considers drafting, establishment of technical committees. We have consultations, notifications, and final approval by the Standards Advisory Council. And this usually takes a time of 24 months when developing any new standard. So the Belize Bureau of Standard, in collaboration with the Department of the Environment, saw in seeing this process through, as the standard is developed to tackle plastic pollution and guide suppliers, importers, and manufacturers in this endeavor. Now, we had sensitization sessions to 3 targeted groups, mainly the public sector on March 3rd, the private sector on March 4th, and the non-governmental organization, NGOs, on March 5th. And basically on these sensitization days, we had introduced to them both standards, went piece by piece through it so that they understand what are the criterias and the guidelines needed. And we got feedback from them and questions on how to improve the standard, and to make sure that there aren't any loopholes and that the standard is fair enough that once it has become a final standard for use, that it is fair enough for all parties that will be affected. From there on, we introduce all these comments and questions to our technical committee, which are the experts that helped us in developing the standard. And this committee includes groups from industry, government, academia, any interested parties who will be affected by the standard. And as Mr. Trejo had rightfully said, we had even had an expert from abroad to make sure that the standard is as fair enough when it is going to be implemented, and that we are rightfully guided in the development of this standard through our standard development process. Now, if we take a look at what the standard for the specification and labeling is, this applies to products specified in the regulation for single-use commercially biodegradable, commercially compostable, or environmentally biodegradable plastic products, namely such as bags referred to carrier bags, plastic shopping bags, and then we have the food containers and utensils such as the bowls, clamshells, cups, forks, knives, lids, plates, soup cups, spoons, straws, trays, and much more. This is as Mr. Cancino had rightfully said in his presentation. And just to go in more in depth in what the specifications and the criteria of that standard involves, we should note, this is very important, that dyes, colors, and even inks, these should all be biodegradable to be able to comply with the standard. So, for example, if your final product complies with the standard and thereafter you print a logo on it using any of those three, if those do not comply with the standard, even though your product has complied with the standard, it will need revisiting for testing because it will not qualify if the inks or any of those are still harmful to an environment. Now, just to go in depth with the definition of some of the words that Mr. Cancino had in his presentation, commercially biodegradable plastic means any plastic that has a bio-based content that is greater than 50% and capable of being biodegraded within 365 days. So it should be greater or equal to 90% carbon dioxide, and when breaking down into methane for anaerobic biodegradation into a non-toxic product by the action of living organisms as per specified testing conditions. Then we have the disintegration, and this shall demonstrate that disintegration of the test material is greater or equal to 90%, and it can be achieved within the specific treatment time of 180 days. Note that for products and materials that are made in several different thicknesses or densities, such as films, containers, and foams, only the thickest or most dense products and materials need to be tested. So not every product has to be tested, just the thickest or the most dense. So one sample from that, once that test is passed, the rest should pass as well. So that is something very important to note. And that, with this said, those products and materials need to be tested, and providing that the chemical composition and structure remains otherwise the same for the rest. Then we have disintegration during composting. This means that satisfactory disintegration for plastic products after 84 days in a control composting test, no more than 10% of its original dry weight remains after sieving through a 2mm sieve. And then we have biodegradation. A plastic product must demonstrate a satisfactory rate of biodegradation by achieving the following ratio of conversion to carbon dioxide within 365 days. Here, the standard also has requirements for labeling. And the labels should comply for these products, for food containers, manufactured, imported, sold, or offered for sale, and it should comply with the Belize Standard specification for labeling. Part 2, labeling of prepackaged goods. We have the material composition, which are raw materials used for containers shall be safe and food grade quality. Then we have the time for biodegrading, which is the time to biodegrade shall not exceed 365 days as per specific testing conditions. And note that preference is made for the use of best by date to comply with date marking requirements. For those who do not know what the best by date is, um, it is a date recommended for the use of the product for the best physical or quality, right? Then we have the characterization and grading. A next thing to note would be requirements for instructions for use shall consider safety precautions as well. Apart from these labeling requirements that are mandatory, they are also optional. And sorry, one more to mention would be the percentage of bio-based carbon content. So apart from these required for the labeling, we also have the optional labeling. And these ones are certification marks, and the use of the biodegradable and compostable certification mark shall be approved by the Belize Bureau of Standards. Then we have microwavable properties. This means that there shall be an indication as to whether the container is microwavable or not. So that's very important if you'd like to put that. And we have the registration and identification marks and purpose or use. And then lastly, the storage conditions. Now we have other part of the standard, which includes environmental claims that should not be used because of it being vague or non-specific, or which broadly implies that the product is environmentally beneficial or environmentally benign. So these are names that should not be used, such as environmentally safe, environmentally friendly, earth friendly, non-polluting, green, nature's friend, ozone friendly, ecological. So these are names to note for environmental claims that should not be used. Now going into the other standard, which is the third-party certification scheme. This scheme is based on third-party certification, which forms the basis for suppliers, importers, and manufacturers of biodegradable materials and products for commercial sale to register products in Belize using independent testing laboratories. Now it will help determine the bio-based content of raw materials, intermediaries, and additives, and finished products, and labeling to communicate this value to the end users. Things to know about this certification scheme, very important pointers, is that acceptance of the test reports through the independent third-party laboratory that is officially approved by the BBS and DOE to perform bio-based content analysis. Now, there will be a listing of these laboratories that are accepted by us when performing these analysis. However, some people may ask if they use other laboratories outside of these listing, could it be accepted? And it is possible. However, that would be accepted if these laboratories are accredited according to the ISO 17025 for the specific bio-based content analysis and recognized for good laboratory practices or recognized by a similar certification body. And that can be accepted after a positive, detailed evaluation of all the requirements of the relevant test standard. Another note is that if your final product conforms with the standard, however, thereafter you include any kind of raw material, inks, or colorants, this must be notified to the DOE. This may change your conformity assessment with conforming to the standard. So that is very important to note. The next thing to note is to report in case test report from a registered laboratory is over 3 years old, the report can be accepted for evaluation only according to the following conditions. So that first condition is a sample from the archives of the laboratory has to be sent and with an appropriate identification method, which is the FTIR analysis. That stands for Fourier Transformer Infrared Spectroscopy. That demonstrates that this sample is completely consistent with the sample submitted in a framework. Or you have the applicant has to provide a statement that the tested sample is completely consistent with the sample submitted in the framework of the certificate process. So that is for that. Now, when we look at special tests are conducted if defects are detected, what this is saying that if there are any third parties that request an intention of proper conduct, that there are defects in your product, then if there are defects that are found, then you will be charged with that special testing. However, if there is none, then that third party who requested it will be charged. And that is the process for that one. Now, looking at the manufacturers that have to apply for permits for importing and license for manufacturing, note that when importing from a company, you will not need to do tests all the time, as the product would be registered and valid for 5 years, like Mr. Cancino had said, and tests will be valid for 3 years. Now, note that manufacturers, if products are produced in multiple sites, verification testing is performed on products of all production sites. Samples shall be labeled with respective production sites, and verification testing of production sites is performed together with the verification testing of the main certificate. So it is very important to know that this certification process is for biodegradable products, and within that scope, it will be considered as such. Now looking at the third-party certification process flow for imports and local production of biodegradable products, Mr. Cancino had briefly informed of this registration. Now, looking at this diagram, it is mostly a document that gives one the administrative requirements in terms of how we are going to implement the standard that we are currently working on. So as you can see, it incorporates 2 stages. The first stage is based on the product registration, and the second stage on the application permits. So before applying for a permit, the product that anyone is applying for in terms of importation, for example, would have had to be an already registered product. So that is already accounted for in the regulation as well. Mostly all products that are considered to be biodegradable in the market and those that will be imported will have to go through this product registration process. As you could see in the stage 1, for that in terms of supply and product registration, that the applicant has to submit a dossier of documents, which Mr. Cancino had earlier mentioned. And there's already a checklist in the document that tells you what all information has to be submitted along with the application, and that the importer that has to ensure that they submit the documentation in regards to their requirements. So this is submitted to the DOE, which would get all this information application and would verify and process the application in terms of the documentation checklist. So those things that has to do with elements relating to conformity assessment, in regard, for example, vetting third-party certificates of analysis, that is the part that DOE will send to the BBS. So an electronic receipt of those documents would be fine to receive. And we believe that from when you receive an application, and provided that the application has all the relevant documentation, provided that the document checklist is satisfactory, we're saying that in order to process that application, it would be 5 working days between the DOE and BBS. That is for the product registration part of it. Now, when DOE verifies that the document checklist based on an applicant is satisfactory, then the DOE will share with the BBS the relevant documentations in regards to the certification documents, which are the analysis. The BBS would then provide to the DOE an assessment in terms of the documents that were submitted, both on part of whether the certificates are genuine, authentic, and that they do come from accredited third-party institutions, and that they are also in line with the standards that is established. So once the BBS has provided that to the DOE, then the DOE will make a decision whether the product should be registered or not. The DOE keeps a registry. If it meets the registration criteria, then the DOE will inform the importer that their products has been registered. And then after, the DOE can update their registry. So after that, the importer can proceed to the application for the permit or to import. So that's why there are two stages. The first stage, at least 5 working days. And the second stage, that can be a little bit more flexible within 3 to 5 working days. So we're not looking more than 2 weeks between product registration and application for permits. But we do have to consider whether we are going to eventually use the hard copy or soft copy for documentation and so forth. So that's in plan. And remember that this product has to be registered before applying for the permit. So that is for this chart. In conclusion here, the standards were developed to address specification and labeling of biodegradable products imported, distributed, manufactured, or sold in Belize. And the standards are intended to be established as compulsory standards to support the enforcement of the regulation and implemented through recognized independent third-party certification scheme. Next step for this standard is that it will be submitted to the Standards Advisory Council. As Mr. Trail rightfully said, that will be submitted during the course of this week, and hopefully within the 3 months should have those national standards activated. So this is the next step. And thank you guys very much for listening in. I hope you learn more after these presentations. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hoy, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have practically reached the end of this sensitization session. We'll have our closing remarks by Mrs. Samantha Banner of the Bureau of Standards. Ms. Banner, please.
They got the screen.
A pleasant good morning, everyone.